I'm Stephen Koranda. This is Don't Lecture Me. Joining me today is author and historian Grady Howell. Grady, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for the honor of being here.
I wanted to start off with something just more general about history. You've written quite a few historical books focusing here on Mississippi. A lot of people maybe they've taken a couple courses in college and high school about history of Mississippi. Why is it important for people to learn about the history here of Mississippi and really know about it?
Well, it's particularly important for people who live here to know the history of the area that they're living in. I'm a ninth generation Mississippian, so I've been steeped in history. I was a cowboy and when I was a child up until July the 3rd of 1955. From that day on, I believe I was a Confederate or a Union soldier, particularly Confederate, interested in the history of my state because at the age of 8 we went to Vicksburg for a picnic, and when we went into the park that day, seeing those cannon and seeing those trench lines just sparked something in me particularly that fired me up on wanting to learn more about what happened to my state.
Do you think a lot of people, if they get that same sort of exposure you did, will really develop that same kind of interest?
If they catch it young enough and they're fired up enough, and of course it was a different age and we were living outdoors and we were playing a lot more with each other and a lot more things. But yeah, it's certainly still possible, and I would encourage anybody who lives not only in Mississippi but anywhere in any part of the country to take an active interest in the history, the true history of the area that they're growing up in or they're raising their children in.
Your most recent book would probably be one of the ways people can learn about this. Your most recent book, Chimneyville. Why don't you talk a little bit about it?
Well, I'm finding at the age of 62 that more and more folks aren't really logged into the history. There's been a lot of omission. When you talk about the Civil War, and I've been Civil Warped since July 3rd of 55, people tend to talk about battles and gun smoke and many balls whistling and cannons and smoke and such. They don't talk about what happened to cities during those wars. And Jackson had a particularly poignant story to tell, and it lay dormant, the history of the city of Jackson, for many years while everybody focused on the battles and the things. And I've been finding that a lot of my friends, and particularly elder friends, if there's anybody left older than me it seems, they don't really know exactly what happened in Jackson while the war was going on. And that's what led me to do Chimneyville.
And a little bit about what happened here in Jackson. That's what leads to the name, isn't it?
Oh, that's what leads to the name for sure. Jackson was visited 4 times during the war between the states by the Northern armies. 3 of those visitations were under the auspices of General William Tecumseh Sherman, who was certainly no friend of the South and personally no friend of Jackson. In fact, of the 4 occupations of Jackson during the war, destruction reigned supreme in only 3 of those occupations, and they were the 3 that General Sherman commanded. So many homes and businesses were burned that were hundreds of chimneys that were just stark and in the area. And in the book, there's a newspaper article from a Canton reporter who came down and recorded what the Union soldiers said. They called it Chimneyville. Well, from that, the citizens who lived in the area picked it up. And it stayed known as Chimneyville for many, many years.
Now this book, though, doesn't only focus on that time period, does it?
No, it focuses on roughly a little better than the first 100 years of Jackson, from its right before its founding, right on up through about the 1940s. It would have been longer. My subject was supposed to cover the entire history of Jackson. However, I was so selective in the images and the materials that I used that at 204 pages, I felt I had to have a cutting point. So if people are interested enough, I may finish the rest of the story one day.
When you look at, for example, a city like Jackson, you were just talking, there's so much focus on battles. The experiences of the city of Jackson here, was this something that was really that instrumental in the Civil War, or is it more the other way? The Civil War was instrumental in Jackson?
Well, if it hadn't been for the Civil War, of course, things that transpired in Jackson and its importance wouldn't have come to pass. Jackson was more important for the fact that it was a railroad's crossroads, and it was behind the Union lines and had to be neutralized by the Union Army in the early stages.
We're here today in the Manship House, a historical really place here in Jackson. How does it play into the history of the city?
This is a wonderful time capsule that folks here in the area and out of the area really need to come visit. This home was here before and during the war. It's one of the very few homes that did not give Chimneyville its name. It survived. People can come and see how a typical, well, atypical, because he was the mayor of Jackson during the war, Charles Manship, lived. See what his avocation was. It really is worthy of people to come down here and learn more about their history by visiting places like this.
What are you really hoping people will get out of this book?
Well, I hope they really get enjoyment out of it. And naturally, I'm not vain. I know they will. It's not me telling the story of Jackson. When you look at the book, it's actually the images and the news articles, letters, and journals from the people who were living at those different times, telling their own story of how Jackson was at that particular moment. And it's obvious. You can just look around you today and see the momentous changes that the city has undergone since its founding.
When you're developing the ideas for your books, if I'm right, you've written more than a dozen books focusing on the history of Mississippi. How do you decide what you're going to choose, and what do you think you might choose next?
Well, number 19 is going to be a novel. My wife told me, she says, after all these years of nonfiction, why don't you write something that makes money? Because with nonfiction, you're always turning any profits that you do after the printer costs are paid into producing your next book. And so you really never realize much. But I have a wonderful novel that I've started, and it's based upon an actual character that lived here in Jackson. It's in the antebellum period. It's pre-Civil War, of course. And it's on Alexander Keith McClung, the famous Black Knight of the South, a duelist, and a very colorful character. In fact, he gave me the title for the book, Invocation to Death.
Well, I wish you luck putting that together. Grady Howell, thanks for joining me today on Don't Lecture Me.
Thank you for the honor again.